Hello, good morning everyone. Still morning, I guess most of you haven't had lunch yet. So good morning everyone. Thank you, David, for the presentation. Cristina and Alexandre, thank you for being here for what is, at least in my point of view, a fascinating question. Will regulation kill AI? We have about 22 minutes, so it tells me the screen, so I'll jump straight into it. Start with a question for Alexandre. Before we try to answer this complicated, provocative question, I'd just like to get a sense, I think the audience as well would like to get a sense of what we're talking about here. What are the guiding principles that we need to think about when we talk about regulating such a big technology, such a recent technology of artificial intelligence? We're talking about safety, non-bias, transparency, and so on. What are the guiding principles in your view?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. We come from the point of view of a very early stage investor where we invest in seed stage, deep tech. The vast majority of our portfolio companies are in the AI space. And the current regulation discussion has many levels of complexity. And because it's a complex topic, we have panels such as this one. On the regulation side, we have different stakeholders in the ecosystem and in the market that we want to protect. We want to protect end users. We want to make sure that AI systems and platforms are safe, fair. They are transparent in the sense of being explainable, and we can understand how decisions are made. We want to protect enterprise. We want to protect corporates. Whenever we implement industry vertical solutions, we want to make sure that they are, again, fair, that they manage data privacy, safety in an equitable way. But we also want to make sure that we don't hinder innovation. And so a large portion of this discussion is around velocity. How much of regulation do we need at industry level and global level versus how fast we want to foster progress and creativity. And much of the exposed discussion as of today is about large language models, global platforms. And in my opinion, I think we also need to bring back the discussion to the level of early stage startups, what that means when we discuss certain measures in terms of regulation in certain jurisdictions, what that means and what that implies for early stage startups in hindering velocity of innovation, being able to come from lab to market in terms of testing new models, new solutions.
Because regulation has costs as well, especially for startups.
It will have costs in terms of compliance. It will have costs in terms of the level of resources that you need at very early stage to develop novel systems and frontier technologies. But there's pros and cons, and I'm sure we'll get to that.
We'll get to that, definitely. Yeah. Cristina, this is a developing issue. In this event, we talk about AI every 2 minutes, but it's at different paces, at different regional levels in terms of regulation. The EU seems to be slightly ahead from what I gather, or what it seems to be, for a change. And in the US, President Biden very recently signaled that AI needs to have some sort of check and balance, some sort of regulation. How do you see the processes at this stage on a global level?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I think when we look at how the different geographies are doing, we can say China starts, the US catch-ups, and Europe regulates. That's still quite accurate. So I think Europe is ahead in terms of trying to understand how we regulate AI. What Biden did end of last month, so a couple of weeks ago, was to just put out some guidelines to guarantee exactly what Alexandre mentioned, that AI is safe, trustworthy, and transparent. And what he mentioned is not very, very concrete, but it's basic things like making sure the content that's dynamically generated by AI is flagged as that. So we can distinguish between what's fake and what's not fake.
So you know what we're looking at. We know where the results are coming from.
Exactly. So these are guidelines that are being defined. I think in Europe, there's lots of work groups and lots of work being done, but there's no concrete measures exactly because it's very, very hard to regulate an entire industry when
it's still developing.
Yeah, exactly. It's developing. Every 6 months, there's breakthroughs, there's new models. Initially, we thought AI was going to automate a lot of the manual tasks we perform. But the first thing we get these large language models to do is to be creative, generate text, generate images, generate video. So we are like, well, maybe we are mistaken in regards to what this technology will bring. So I think it's hard. And to me, the way we will regulate is going to be sector by sector, because like think about like fintech and the financing industry, the rules will be very different from HR or from health. Exactly.
Yeah, that's one thing we mentioned in our chat backstage, and Alexandre was talking about this in a very interesting way. Is how do you see the role of these vertical regulators? I mean, they're also starting from scratch. You know, fintechs have existed for a while, and we have the issue of AI in our own personal finances is very important in business finances. Health is crucial, as we saw with data in COVID. How do you see these vertical regulations proceeding?
I think the vertical regulation, the industry-specific regulation, will be a crucial building block, as Cristina is mentioning, of the overall regulating landscape. You know, when you look at healthcare, for example, you want to make sure that, you know, AI-assisted software or AI-powered software can act as a medical device, and as such, there needs to be a certain level of compliance with industry-specific rules. If you look at, you know, risk modeling or risk assessment in financial services, you do need a certain level of compliance with specific rules of that sector. And you know, you want to make sure that on the one hand, you understand how decisions are made, but whenever, you know, there's a risk judgment or whenever there's a medical procedure, you want to make sure that, you know, there's fairness, there's no bias, and there's an equitable approach to what you're doing, but also that there's, you know, precision. You want to make sure that, you know, you don't understand the level of error that is involved in a certain model. This is on the one hand. The other aspect is that, you know, by having industry-specific regulation, and it boils down to the level of risk and how risk is embedded into the regulation. But when you have such frameworks of regulation, then you have, you know, a sort of leveled playing field for all players, be it large incumbents or early-stage startups. And that can also be seen as a potential opportunity.
Definitely, yeah. Cristina, would like to talk to you about how much self-regulation is going to be needed. Like every technology, there's a certain amount of self-protection. There was recently an issue with OpenAI in Italy, where the company essentially corrected its own behavior, and it said to sort out the problem itself. No one wants to create problems for themselves. How important is this role of auto-correction, to put it this way, in this technology?
So, like, I think regulation is needed because it will set like that level playing field, but also, so like I'm an investor and I also consider myself an AI entrepreneur. I built several companies. One was an AI company that I sold, and basically I see really the industry trying to do the right things. So the example of like there was a problem with OpenAI, like in Italy. So the Italy government considered that OpenAI was illegal and was allowing, like, I think it was like people like below a certain age to use ChatGPT, and they put some controls in place in less than 2 weeks. Problem solved. So as I speak with OpenAI, like big companies, everyone is trying to do the right thing. So that will be a natural way of making sure we keep AI safe, trustworthy, and transparent. Of course, I don't know if you know, but New York, the state of New York, passed a law recently that says if you are a company and in HR you use an AI system to either help you select candidates, like screen CVs, all of that, you need to have an auditor to make sure your AI systems are not biased. And I think like that's good for everyone, right? Like first for the consultants, of course.
They'll lose a job.
So there will be lots of new jobs being created, including for auditors and consultants that will have to audit these systems. But if I'm the HR department of a big corporate and like maybe I want to be competitive and use AI to help me do a better job, but like I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing and I'm buying a system that complies with my values, what I believe in, and is not introducing biases in the process. So, like, very good point. Regulation is needed, but I think self-regulation is a thing. And at a time where things are changing very fast, I really believe the players in the industry are doing what they can to make sure AI stays within the boundaries.
So it's my turn to be a bit provocative here. I don't necessarily believe in self-regulation as a great solution. We've been here for several editions of a Web Summit talking about, for example, data protection. And I think it's a leap of faith to expect the big tech companies to put self-regulation, or shall I call it damage control, ahead of...
Maybe self-regulation is the wrong expression.
Yeah, exactly. It's damage control. When there's a problem, they fix it. Yeah, ahead of profits. Let's be blunt. Ahead of money. My question to both of you is: does AI bring, with such a wide technology and with so much unknown impact yet, does it bring a further need for the tech community or the big tech players to have more contact, to have a better relationship with regulators, with governments? And do these governments, I mean, Biden said something very vague, but do the governments also need to be a bit more open-faced towards the industry?
I think, I think we're living in a first wave of regulatory efforts and trying to understand what level of compliance is required to cope with the velocity of progress and innovation that we're currently experiencing in the AI space. If you look at different jurisdictions, in the U.S., I think there was this fast move in issuing the executive order with certain guidelines. There's a very open discussion with big tech investors and big tech companies about fundamental philosophy of whether, being in favor or against regulation, as if it was only an open source versus closed source discussion. I think, there needs to be collaboration between large tech houses, governments, but also, earlier stage founders, industry constituents, just because, we can't rely on a discussion about regulation that is exclusively protectionist, with certain countries within the EU issuing a certain position because of the companies that stem from that specific geography. We can't hinder early stage startups from, testing, developing novel technologies because of a high burden of compliance before they actually become to a certain level of critical mass. So I think it will boil down to the discussion around risk levels. If it's a risk intrinsic structure of compliance and regulation, then I'm not sure yet what, I don't know what the index of risk will be for each specific regulation, whether it's, computing power, whether it's, volumes of data being processed, whether it's end users being affected. But we all need to make sure that, on the one hand, we don't hinder progress, but yes, we do have, massified usage of safe and fair technologies.
It's a very rapidly growing technology, so the
if
balance.
I was building a company today, I would, of course, try to do the right thing.
So,
right?
excuse me?
Like, I would do the right thing,
okay.
But I would not wait for regulation, because I think the pace at which governments and institutions can come up with regulation and the pace at which AI is developing and startups have the opportunity to change entire industries is just very different. So I think this will be maybe what happened with Uber and some of the gig economy type companies in the last decade, where it was very hard to deploy these solutions massively because there was no regulation, and some companies were playing in the void and trying to work with city councils and countries and so on. It was hard, and it was
still is.
It still is. But if I was a company leveraging AI today, I would just play my own rules and keep going. Now,
because you can't play by a rule book if there isn't a rule book.
Exactly. If you're building a company and trying to change an industry, are you going to wait for the regulators to tell you what to do? You're not going to do that. But now, one of the biggest challenges everyone has in this industry is to build trust. Like, how do you, let's say you're a company, you're selling a system that has AI at its core. How do you convince your customers that they can trust your AI solution? Like, that's a big challenge. And you need to put boundaries in place. And you need to have some level of explainability into how do the models work. And you need to be able to teach the models to become better. And you need to make it transparent, like, how confident is the model in performing these tasks? So if the model is very confident, I can trust AI. If the model is not confident, I can put a human in the loop and have humans supervise AI. So, like...
so which kind of jobs are going to be created? You were mentioning a while ago, there's a whole new capacity. I mean, it's interesting for the people that are here because it's their industry. Which kind of jobs are going to be created? Is it more marketing jobs? Is it more compliance jobs? Is it more coding, more protection of coding?
So, I mean, like I don't know, but I can give you some examples. For example, in terms of auditing and regulation, there's for sure a new practice being developed. If we think about making sure, like, there's lots of developers, like AI developers, it's a new area, so in huge demand. Then, like, lots of humans will have an important role in training the AI and giving feedback to the AI. But then I believe there's another area we don't talk about very often, which is curating the content and the knowledge. When we train a large language model on top of, like, the entire Wikipedia content, I need to make sure the content that's on Wikipedia, it's complete and it's up to date, right? If the facts there are not true, exactly, like, my AI will give me the wrong result. So, like, how do we make sure the knowledge we are using to give to these models is complete and up to date? Is a problem that I don't believe we are discussing.
So we have to fact check the machine, essentially.
Yeah.
But I think if I may add, totally agree with Cristina's points. I think, if you dive into certain verticals in terms of industries, this becomes especially complex to navigate from a regulatory standpoint while you're drafting new regulation. If you think about healthcare, for example, you want to make sure that if you're developing novel formulations for new medication, you want to make sure that the data sets and that the models that you use have been trained on the right type of data sets that are inclusive of all sorts of end users that you are targeting with your new product.
And foolproof for manipulation, for example.
Yes. If you want to make sure that, you're using certain models to detect complex diseases or to monitor and process information about chronic diseases, you want to make sure that you did not train your models exclusively on biased data sets. And so, how do you cope this, on the one hand, with the level of maturity and resources that very large companies have versus very early stage startups? So I think one of the complex challenges will be whenever industry-specific regulation meets testing new products. So if I'm a founder of a startup and I'm developing a new sort of AI-powered product and I want to apply that to healthcare or to financial services, and all of a sudden for the first pilot or the first proof of concept, I need to be highly compliant with industry-specific regulations. There's almost an impossible task ahead of me to correctly allocate the resources that I have at pre-seed or seed stage to complying with all industry requirements for a certain type of product. And that's why I think the discussion around risk levels and how risk should offer different thresholds for different complexities of requirements and compliance for different maturities is of the essence to apply
that's very interesting because we keep talking, in my industry, the news industry is to blame partly for this because we look at the bigger things, the big platforms, the chat GPTs and so on, because let's face it, it's sexy for the readers.
Everyone understands.
Everyone understands and it's simple and you get all sorts of funky stories about it. But on the other hand, what we're interested in here, I think, is talking about how this regulation or this medicine will affect the different types of players. And the startups, as Alexandre was saying, there's a certain level of need of regulation, but at the same time, some startups may fall back or not be able to comply. But on the other hand, as you were saying, the level playing field must be reached at some point, and this may open an opportunity. It's the final question. They're going to kick us out. So the final opportunity, it's an opportunity to create business. Do you agree?
Yeah, if I may, I totally agree. I think, provided that the level of regulation is adequate and reasonable, then yes, it potentially offers a leveled playing field for startups vis-a-vis incumbents and large corporates. Whereas, if I'm launching a new product, then I can make sure that end users and the industry players that will use and buy my product can feel safe and feel, and trust that my product has been responsibly developed. And, that's my final note. On different geographies are setting up, safety institutes nationwide, are setting up research centers. We have our own Center for Responsible AI. Cristina serves on the board of the entity, where we have multiple portfolio companies serving, and it's one example of a group of founders and entrepreneurs committing to adopting responsible approaches to developing new products. And I think that's maybe a start. Committing to a certain set of guidelines that may not be exclusively mandatory or prevent someone from freedom to operate, but there's a directional approach to responsibility.
And I think there's another very important point. Like, this desire to regulate makes total sense, but at the end of the day, we also want to be competitive. So if we're going to try to restrict our companies too much, then the innovation in the US or in China will just happen faster.
Us, yeah.
And that's something we don't want to happen.
Of course.
So I think there's a tough balance, but again, it's still early days, and I believe there's so many people working on this that we'll get to the right balance.
So like any medicine, we probably have to take it, but we have to see which dose and when.
Exactly.
Cristina, Alexandre, thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating, at least for me, to have this conversation with you. Thank you, everybody in the audience as well. Have a good day.